Okay, we made it far.
Whenever you're ready, you could just pop the projector on.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do I do that?
I think the remote is over there. I don't know.
So you're more specific.
Somebody had online, but that was-
Because I'm very much.
Yeah,
I mean,
see,
and then if you go.
Yeah.
Maybe my idea is I want to get.
So let me know when you're ready. I'll give you a little intro. Go, sir.
Oh.
All right, everyone. Thanks for coming out today. Accuweather briefing. Good morning. Hope everyone had a great weekend. Today we have DePodwin here from Accuweather. He's Director of Forecasting Operations. So thank you, Dan, for coming in. I know we had a little switch last week, and we got you here now. So thanks for coming out. And I know we have a busy, severe weather to talk about over the past couple days, both big events. So let you guys start whenever you're ready.
Thanks. Morning, good to be here. I don't know if I came in the fall. Probably not. Had a kid in the fall, so was a little busy. Our daughter. So plenty of interesting things to talk about. For those who don't know me, I'm Dan DePodwin. I lead up the forecasting team at Accuweather here at State College, about a 55 member forecasting team. We look at weather all over the world, especially the U.S. And I wanted to start with the weather from the last couple of days, especially in the southeast, with the various different severe thunderstorms that occurred Friday and then again Saturday, Sunday. We're just going to focus on Friday for time. Pretty active 3-day period across the southeast, and unfortunately a deadly day on Friday with a number of fatalities with this tornado here in western Mississippi near the town of Rolling Fork. I'll look at that here in a second. This is the Friday storm reports from the SPC, and you can see I think I looked at radar. I think all these reports are basically the same supercell that went all the way from Mississippi up through Alabama. And then there was a fair number of reports from yesterday as well as Saturday, a little bit farther south of this area. So definitely an active 3-day stretch. I wanted to start with I guess we'll look at the overall synoptic pattern for Friday across the southeast. Here's Friday afternoon. This is the RAP analysis. Pretty impressive shortwave trough digging into West Texas, and then a deepening surface low here over western Arkansas with a couple of isobars out of the Gulf, so pretty good moisture return. And here's so here's 18Z on Friday. Or sorry, here's 12Z and 18Z, and by 0Z Saturday, this trough looks like it has a bit of a negative tilt, fairly good divergence aloft here ahead of this, and as a result, a deepening surface cycle moving off to the northeast. It was a fairly uncapped warm sector by late in the afternoon. We'll look at it sounding here in a second from Jackson and see how the environment evolved over the course of the afternoon. So here's 0Z Saturday, and then that moves off to the northeast. And on the backside, there was some really impressive snow in Madison, picked close to a foot of snow in Wisconsin. It was a very narrow band of heavy snow on the backside of this. Chicago, I think, ended up once again with basically nothing, because it seems like it can't snow in Chicago, just like it can't snow in New York this year. It's not a pattern that's really been conducive for that. And then that cyclone included and moved into the Great Lakes by Saturday evening. And did bring some severe weather reports I believe there were a couple of reports here on Saturday afternoon across the Ohio Valley. Good reports from Saturday. Yep. So always good to follow the track of the shortwave trough. And if you get enough instability, you sometimes can squeeze out some wind reports, especially this time of year as we get into March. Here's the 18Z observed Jackson, Mississippi sounding from Friday afternoon. Still capped in the mid-levels, but really good mid-level lapse rates of 8.6 Celsius per kilometer here. Obviously, very good directional shear, but still not a classic long loop photograph yet. Some surface cape, but again, you're still capped. The trough is still pretty far west at this point, and there was nothing going at the time here in Jackson. But it's pretty impressive to see the modified environment by 0Z. I'll toggle back and forth here between these two. Obviously, the cap is basically eroded. The tornado for reference went through it around 1Z through Rolling Fork, which is not too far northwest of Jackson. So it's probably a pretty good sounding representative of the environment. A couple things that I noted here was that one, the surface winds have gone from south at 18Z to a bit more southeast at 0Z. You've significantly increased your mid-level winds by 10 to 15 knots, and the hodograph as such is significantly elongated here and stretched. Your composite parameters are also pretty significant, 8.8 supercell composite. Obviously, you can have composite parameters sky high and still never realize a tornado or a supercell, but obviously it shows what the environment was like. Surface-based CAPE has increased as well, and storm relative felicity has gone from 82 surface to 1, 166 surface to 3 to 172 and 345. So obviously the environment was pretty conducive for supercell thunderstorms on Friday evening, and that's unfortunately what occurred there in Mississippi. I just want to show the aerial view of this as well. This is the SPC archive from their meso analysis for Friday evening. Here's the surface winds and pressure from, this is 20Z, so mid to late afternoon. You can see that as the cyclone deepens, you further back the flow surface. That certainly aids in the helicity increasing as well. There was a pretty good jet streak here in the upper levels across Arkansas, and obviously your Trauma 500. So pretty volatile setup. That's a brief overview. I guess anyone else have observations about Friday or Saturday or Sunday across the Southeast they want to share? I guess the one thing I also wanted to point out too is a significant tornado parameter, or I guess this is a violent tornado parameter. From it pretty accurately points out the area of greatest risk for a violent tornado. Again, these parameters need to be used with caution because you can have these and not actually realize anything if you don't have a trigger or whatever it might be. But I think Rolling Fork is right around here, so tend to find the gradients of these sometimes are the highest area of interest, not necessarily the maximum. All right, so I guess we can transition to weather or today going forward. Just sort of to get a sense of where we are. Again, this cyclone included on Saturday evening, and then by later last night, had a pretty zonal flow across the U.S. Had some interesting severe weather and a lot of flash flooding last night in the southeast with and some pretty impressive hail too, with just some weak ripples moving along the boundary down there installed out front. You can see we had another shortwave coming across the U.S. here. That's going to be the cause of our increasing clouds today, and then maybe some rain later on. And then the focus for this week will be a couple different things, and we'll talk about that here. So here's where we stand this morning with satellite. You can see the ongoing convection in the southeast. Plenty of cloud cover, and you can see our trying to develop a little weak wave here across the Ohio Valley with the short wave clouds in the mid-level, or at least moisture in the mid-level spreading across Pennsylvania. Pretty little wound up system here over Colorado this morning, and mid-level moisture moving onshore in the west, and that's going to set the stage for yet another rain storm out west, which they really don't need. I guess they don't really need much more, but the moisture is still beneficial. The short-term droughts obviously basically ended, but the long-term groundwater situation still is pretty dire out there. So I think that's important to keep in mind, is that we still need a lot more moisture to recharge the aquifers out of California. So there's our satellite. At least the water vapor here is our visible this morning. Some low-level clouds behind the departing shortwave in the Ohio Valley. See the snowpack across the northern tier.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably a pretty good summary of that. We'd expect to see plenty of convection here on radar in the southeast and probably some lighter precip here in the Ohio Valley. Go to our radar loop, and that's indeed what we find. Also find a good ad for the Altoona curve. So here's our current radar. A little bit of snow ongoing out in Denver with that shortwave shield of rain across Ohio moving east or northeast. And there was a tornado watch. I'm not sure if it's still active, but there was one a couple hours ago across central Georgia this morning. Aside from that, basically quiet elsewhere. And finally, our surface analysis. That ongoing convection sort of along this pressure trough in Georgia and front back to the west. See an inverted trough here over western Pennsylvania. And then another front of some pretty cold air still locked up in Canada. Still even though it's been early spring here, plenty of cold air still around with temperatures well below zero here in the prairies of Canada this morning. Stationary front along the front range. Looks like pretty good surface convergence there with that snow ongoing. And with that, I guess we'll move to sort of how this is going to unfold. We'll start with the northeast, and then we'll go sort of longer range or mid-range and look at the severe weather risk later on today, I guess. Or not today, but Thursday and Friday. Any other comments before we go into that, or questions? All right, so here's sort of just looking at the progression over the next. We'll start in the northeast actually, since we are located in the northeast. We'll talk about what's exciting around here as we head into the last week of March. So here's about where we stand currently. Late this morning, broad southwest flow aloft. Pretty strung out shortwave at 500, helping be responsible for that rain in western PA. That moves into the northern part of the state by later this afternoon, and then pretty quickly races eastward offshore by tomorrow morning. Some of the models last week had this amplifying and becoming a significant nor'easter, which to me never really made sense given the flow. It just never seemed it was such a fast flow that in order for this thing to really deepen, you'd have to get really lucky with how it unfolded. No cold air around really whatsoever.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. Can you just tell us, first of all, because I can't see from back here, what level are we looking at, and what's the time scale that we're?
Sure. Let me make this bigger so you can get all that on.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. 500 millibar vorticity winds, and this is overnight. So this just really moves off to the east and gets sheared out. Looking at 700 here this morning, so here we are at 700 millibar relative humidity and heights and wind. Decent moisture in the wind levels. This is the NAM and the GFS I have up here just for sake of comparison. So here's 11 a.m. this morning. We are still mostly clear out there. Looks like some high clouds trying to filter in. Looks like by 11 we start to saturate a bit at least the NAM says we are still dry at 700 at 11, and then moisten up by 2. Probably get cloudy here afternoon. Looking at even the lower levels, here's 925 relative humidity and temperature and winds this afternoon at 2 o'clock. See a 925 millibar low that's developed across the central part of the state. Actually, it strengthens pretty quickly by later on this afternoon, and plentiful moisture behind that. So we expect to probably see some precipitation out of this, especially with that PVA going on aloft. And then here's the surface QPF for this afternoon with that low. I wouldn't say it's really strengthening, but maybe it drops several millibars by later on this evening as it heads offshore. Precip shields develops on the cold side of that low and probably brings some elevation snow, a pretty small stripe of snow to maybe the northern tier of Pennsylvania, and then obviously into the Catskills and the elevation in New York there late afternoon. But given the temperatures ahead of this, it's probably the 40s in most places today. It's going to have a hard time sticking especially if it comes in during the day before the sun sets up there, unless you're in the highest terrain. So locally, it seems like a nice and really, I think this day looked I thought this day looked more wet when I looked at it on Friday. Ends up being a pretty nice spring day until later on this afternoon, where it probably showers a bit and a little damp. Gets a little cooler, but overall not too bad. North of here is probably a bit wetter. We get on that into that precip shield. Here's surface wind gusts. Take a look if there's any risk of breezy conditions. Doesn't really look like. Again, it's not a strong cyclone. These are 10-meter wind gusts from the NAM and the GFS, and maybe across some of the higher elevations later tonight is the low strength if you get some breezy conditions. Into the day tomorrow, 10 to 15 knots. Doesn't look overly windy tomorrow. Have a bit of a pressure gradient behind us to part low. So in terms of what tomorrow looks like, still some moisture in the low levels at 925 here, but as you head into 700, it dries out very, very quickly unless you're in New England where you have lingering moisture and probably some precipitation throughout the day tomorrow. But here it probably turns out pretty nice with maybe some clouds around. We can look at a sounding for tomorrow here, central PA. This is for tropical tidbits. Probably get some reasonable fair weather cumulus tomorrow, but overall should be a pretty nice afternoon, I would think here. Again, we've had a nice spring day today, and tomorrow probably should be pretty nice as well. Just looking into the middle of the week, we're still this very quick west-east flow in the mid-levels here. This is Wednesday, midday. Pretty impressive shortwave digging across the northern Great Lakes on Wednesday afternoon. And we'll have to watch that, probably rain here, but could be some a line of gusty showers on late Wednesday. You can see at 700, you can see a depiction of the cold front there on Wednesday afternoon. Pretty narrow band of moisture. Pretty impressive temperature gradient at 850 aloft, where you've got some significant mid-level cold air behind this feature. And again, you can see that at 925 as well. And at the surface, we've got a pretty impressive depiction of a front on Wednesday evening with a compact area of low pressure here in Ontario. Whether or not this is snow is probably up for debate. This model here, P-type algorithm depicts it as snow, but if you look at some of the soundings from Wednesday afternoon, it seems like for instance, in northern Pennsylvania, this is close to the border. I guess this would be snow if it comes in now. You know, it depends on what time of day it comes in. So something to watch on Wednesday is whether this is going to be snow in some places or rain. Here it's probably more likely rain, but it could be a brief period of heavier snow north of here and reduction visibility, and could cause some issues, especially if it comes in and it cools down rapidly after the sunset. Might get some freeze-up issues later on Wednesday into Wednesday evening. You can look quickly at the surface temps on. Here's the GFS surface temps on Wednesday at Thursday at 0Z, so Wednesday evening, and then by 6Z, so they've fallen significantly below freezing across most of the northern and western three-quarters of Pennsylvania by Wednesday overnight. But here's your daytime highs on Wednesday, so plenty of warm air out ahead of this, which is to be expected, especially in March. We're probably pushing into the 50s here on Wednesday, it looks like. Pretty well mixed ahead of this front. So be careful on temperature forecast Wednesday. Sometimes we see these days really sneak up as you sort of squeeze out everything you can get from the atmosphere, with especially the southwest wind, still dry, no vegetation yet, haven't leafed out. So we've seen that happen a handful of times in the last couple of months. We've had a lot of these days, it seems like, especially with no snowpack this winter, where it's been dry and achieved pretty high on our temps. Any other observations in the Northeast this week? Questions?
I think what you just said happened yesterday.
Temps? Yeah.
It seemed like high temperature forecasts on Friday for Sunday were lower than what was observed.
It's probably true. What did we get to here yesterday? Have that handy.
My car said 58.
64. No, no, not that. Where's mine? Yeah.
There you go.
57.
Yeah.
So it was a very nice afternoon yesterday with the sun. It really felt great. Let's pull up here's the Saturday 18Z run of the HER. Sorry, of the NAM. The 3-kilometer NAM for Sunday afternoon. So this would have been what we were looking at if you were making a forecast on Saturday for Sunday. And again, you're at least mixed 850, it looks like. But a west flow, it's a downslope, you do it, that certainly helps. Plentiful sunshine. Let's see what the sounding was from the 12Z run on Sunday. So this was yesterday, 12Z for yesterday afternoon. That's pretty similar. I didn't look at the temps to see how well that compared, but certainly a day where you can get a lot of good mixing and bump up the temp as much as you probably can. So watch for that Wednesday as well. It does look like it turns chilly in the wake of that front. Quickly, sort of brief shot of polar air. Here's the national look at the GFS and European for Thursday evening. High pressure briefly builds into the northeast. It's like a dry day on Thursday. Dry in the mid-levels. Should be a nice day again, probably, maybe on the cooler side, but not too bad for late March. And then we get into a warm convection regime on Friday. So I want to talk a bit about the rest of the country. Anything else on the northeast observations? So to me, the main thing this week looks like the potential for severe weather again, but maybe probably north and west of where it was last week by Thursday and Friday. So we'll just sort of talk about where these synoptic features go this week. So here's tomorrow afternoon, trailing shortwave in the northeast, or sort of mid-Atlantic, I guess, or Ohio Valley. Not a lot of moisture associated with that. Wouldn't expect a whole lot from that, but a bowling ball low off the west coast here by Tuesday evening. And that's going to bring another round of all that rain and snow they've had out there. Here's the surface, pretty compact area of low pressure. Last week, the observations in San Francisco were pretty amazing. I made the comment, it's probably the closest that residents of San Francisco will get to experiencing tropical storm conditions in their lifetime. Well, not in their lifetime, because they'll probably have something like that again, but they had 7 consecutive hours of tropical storm force winds at Oakland, for instance, which is really impressive. There's some interesting websites out there, which I hadn't found until last week, that talk about the different Bay Area windstorms. There's a Bay Area storm index that some guys put together, takes into different parameters. The biggest one out there was sometime in December of '95, I think. But that's the concern with these, is that you get some type of meso vortice or meso low rotating around these systems, which is what happened last week, where you fling that into the coast and get wind gusts of 70 to 80 miles an hour at fairly low elevation. So I'll have to watch that again this week. This looks like it digs pretty far south, gets into Southern California by Thursday morning. Both the GFS and European, at least the operational runs agree on that. And that's going to be the system that may bring us a pretty significant, what could be a significant severe weather day on Friday. Here's Thursday, just looking out across the middle of the country, plenty of warm convection, dry air in the mid-levels, and wouldn't expect much happening Thursday. Here's dew points, so starting to see moisture return from the Gulf on Thursday afternoon, with dew points up into the 60s across Texas, and that continues Thursday evening, and then by Friday morning, plenty of surface moisture up into the Midwest ahead of this pretty significant shortwave that's coming out of the Rockies on Friday morning. So, there's been some discussion on whether Thursday could be a day of severe weather. We can pull up what the Storm Prediction Center has for Thursday. They've been out looking both Thursday and Friday for a while. Here's their day 4, 15% area for Thursday. I haven't read this yet this morning to see what they talk about, but that looks like a pretty reasonable area for Thursday. It's probably very late in the day into the overnight time period, just given when the height falls occur. Although you do have, at least on the European, you have this lead shortwave on Thursday late afternoon that maybe could trigger some storms across central Oklahoma. Maybe that's what they're looking at there from the SPC. But the height falls don't really get going across the plains until Friday. Obviously, height falls being a good trigger for convection. Pretty significant height falls in this zone in the Midwest on Friday afternoon. And really, it looks like about close to 100 knots of wind at 500, so plenty of wind energy there. Surface moisture cooling across the Midwest on Friday afternoon as well. Here's the model instability for Friday at 5 p.m. Looks like 1,000 to 2,000 surface base cape in Iowa, for instance. Could end up being a pretty narrow area, but certainly looks, from a synoptic standpoint, looks like a pretty good setup for severe thunderstorms on Friday afternoon. So obviously some differences to work out with the model guidance. Is this a cutoff low like the GFS shows? Is it an open wave like the European has? Definitely something for us to be watching this week. One of the other tools that's I like to use is this is the European EFI, which is the Extreme Forecast Index, and it's based basically on it takes the model data from the ensemble and it compares it to the model climatology. So it's not like the 30-year historical average. It compares it to the some climatology that's in the model. There's details on the European website if you're interested to look at. I always forget the exact definition of it, but basically it tells you where things are, very different from what is typical. So for instance, this is the Cape shear EFI. So where you have an anomalous Cape and shear value, you have to sort of use it with a grain of salt because you'll see like really high values in Minneapolis, like on the cold side of it's sort of strange, right? Because it's all compared to climatology. So, but basically, if you see a high area of these values in the plains in May, that's a significant signal that the conditions are potentially right for a significant severe weather day. So here's Friday, for instance. This is the Friday values of the Cape shear parameter from this product. And based on the synoptic pattern, this seems pretty right, somewhere up in this zone. And the SPC has a 30% area, which is pretty unusual for a day 5 risk. So we'll see how they evolve that over the coming days. They talk about all hazards, potentially increasing, intense southwesterly mid-level flow overlap the warm sector, could take on a bimodal character. Maybe 2 different areas it looks like. So definitely things to watch as we head through the week. One other tool I wanted to show is this is the SIPS analog tool. I'm not sure if anyone's seen this before.
Yes.
Great. This is out of St. Louis University, I think.
Yes.
Yes. I really like this tool as sort of just a sense for what could happen or what's happened in the past. It uses the modeled fields and compares it to climate or compares it to what's occurred in the past. So it is, it's taking the model for basically as fact. So if the model is wrong, obviously the analog can be wrong. But for instance, here's the SIPS analogs for Friday, and let's go to just hazard guidance. This is the probability of any severe report, basically, based on what's happened on the top. They have 15 analogs they do. We have 15 analogs. So certainly a signal here, severe weather is likely with this weather pattern that's been modeled by the GFS. You can do 5 severe reports. This is the percentage of 5 severe reports within an area. Percentage of top 15 analogs exceeding 5 severe weather reports within 110 kilometers of the grid point. It's a pretty good signal there. And you can also look at the thumbnails of the actual severe reports for each of these analogs. So here's the top analog, which is March 23rd, 2011. with a severe area across. It was mostly a hail day, it looked like, with a couple of tornadoes. But there's some pretty impressive severe weather days in this analog set, which is something that should get our attention as well for Friday. This is interesting. The SBC talked about potentially 2 areas of concern on Friday, and this analog would seem to suggest that's possible. This is also March 23rd, but 1991. And then here's March 13th, 2006, which obviously was a very bad day with 24 significant tornadoes and 33 long track tornado reports. So certainly a signal for severe weather on Friday. You can see there's other ones here that are down. This is, sort of from most matched to least matched, but all generally have a match of an analog. But you see there's definitely some very impressive days here. This is 1982, April 3rd. So definitely some things to keep an eye on this week. We can just quickly look at the sort of what happens after Friday for the weekend here. You'd expect the system to keep on moving into the northeast, which it does, starts to get caught up in the zonal flow. The GFS, interestingly, is slower with this. This makes sense, I guess, because it's cut off on Friday and it's just farther back on Saturday. There's the European much farther ahead. So it looks like some type of precipitation likely here Saturday. Well, not some type, not snow, it doesn't seem like. Rain. There is some surface, there's definitely some dew points into the 50s modeled on the guidance here across the I-95 corridor. Interesting little jet feature there on Saturday afternoon. GFS does show some very weak surface instability. Wouldn't rule out some thunder with the front on Saturday, certainly now as we head into April. And the next week looks like a weekend. We'll see what happens next week, but haven't really studied that yet. I'll pull up some of the ensembles for long range, but while I do that, any comments, questions, observations? Actually, I'll do this. Here's the GFS ensemble 2 meter temp anomaly for, we'll just start at the weekend here. Could be a pretty mild start of the weekend. Ahead of that front, probably cooling down behind it. Here's Monday, GFS with a pretty strong signal of warmer than normal temps and broad southwesterly flow at 500 would certainly support that. Could be a milder start of the week. That looks like a pretty mild pattern early next week if the GEPS is right. With a trough, a mean trough in the west and maybe even a building ridge in the southeast. So that would be a pretty mild start of April if that unfolded. Anyone else look at April yet?
Could you show the euro?
Yeah, let's see if I don't have that. Well, I have it.
It's there.
I have it. Yeah, here we go. Here's Tuesday evening, Wednesday. Similar idea.
Yeah.
A little bit farther east on the ridge axis and deeper trough in the west, but the general idea is certainly the same. I haven't studied the teleconnections for next week, but at least the 2 main ensembles are suggesting that a milder pattern. You do have to watch this time of year, obviously, with back to work stuff in the northeast. Where does that end up? But certainly the southeast Tennessee Valley looks pretty warm. That may continue to. This pattern would have me worried for some more severe weather. Dan?
Feel free to answer or pass on as much as you want. Looking at it from a climate perspective, I know the Gulf is very pronouncedly warm this spring. So how much emphasis do you put on that when you're forecasting spring tornadoes in the southeast? You brought up moisture return and things of that a lot. And I think a paper just came out last month saying that the Gulf is actually warming at the twice the average of global oceans. So
Interesting.
thinking about this in the future, how much, I guess how much emphasis do you put on those types of things?
I mean, in terms of the discussions we have as a forecasting team, that comes up on a regular basis, whether it be the sea surface temps of the Gulf or even the temps off the East Coast for different situations. You can see here, it's a little hard to see, but plenty of warm water anomalies here in the Gulf as well as off the East Coast. And we definitely talk about that regularly because it's hard to quantify like what that does to the forecast, but it's certainly a positive from a moisture and potential standpoint, right? I think that may have been one of the reasons that outbreak in December of 2021, the Mayfield, Kentucky tornado was so bad, because you had that. I mean, you always have the wind energy in the cold season. It's just a matter of overlapping the instability. And I think with warmer water, you would imagine that there would be more opportunities for increased moisture transport. So, I mean, it generally makes sense. I think the challenge is like, how do we quantify that in the forecast? Like, how does that change what we might be forecasting? But we've seen that too, like in the Northeast too. There's been I'm not sure if it was last summer or the summer before, but there's generally been like a marine heat wave is what it's termed. Not an expert in those, but that's a new term now that's really coming out. There's some papers on that. But that can help fuel some of these heavy rainfall events in the Northeast. You get certain types of fronts near the coast and different things drawn northward. Again, you're pulling in air that is, it's really more moist than it may have been otherwise. So it certainly adds something to it. So it's an interesting discussion about this cool pocket. This is, again, I'm not an expert on these things, but this is the PMM. I forget what that stands for. It's one of the teleconnections, but this cold pool here, El Nino obviously is forecast to develop this summer in the Pacific. But there's some thought that this cooler water anomaly here, this may get drawn south, and apparently this can sort of put the brakes on and move to El Nino sometimes. So that may impact a lot of things, but it may also impact the Atlantic hurricane season, which an El Nino phase would favor a less active season. But if it doesn't go full El Nino, sort of neutral to weak El Nino, that may not necessarily be the case. So something for us to watch as we head into the spring and summer. Anything else? Great. Thanks for your time, everybody.
Thanks for coming out, Dan. Appreciate it.
Hey, how are you?
You guys doing them all?